Jim Ryan would like to just give a brief history on St. Patrick, since this is his celebration. So, Jim.
Murphy, you're a very tough man to follow. Patrick, St. Patrick, was not Irish born. You all know this. He was born in Roman Britain, near the Clyde River, which is now Scotland. This is in the latter part of the 4th century. His father was a tax collector. His grandfather was a priest. This was not uncommon in those days. Very upstanding family in the Roman Empire. At age 16, you may know this story, he was captured by Irish pirates, brought back to Ireland, and sold into slavery. And he was forced to live in a hut and be a shepherd in a land he didn't know, and with a language he did not yet know. He would learn it, and forced to face his own insignificance. It's quite ironic, I think, that Ireland's patron saint was enslaved against his own will by the Irish. But that is his history and our history. So while in Ireland, he developed a very, very spiritual life. He prayed constantly. He had nothing else to do except tend the sheep, and he prayed constantly. And he, in fact, became a mystic, and he had dreams, and he listened to those dreams. One of the dreams said, "There's a boat waiting for you." And he listened to this, and he acted on it, and he found the boat. It was 200 miles away. He escaped his captors and trekked 200 miles, found the boat. The boat was ready to leave port. The captain did not want to take Patrick back home. Patrick convinced him. He may have been the first to kiss the Blarney Stone. And eventually he got back home to Wales, I guess, or Scotland is the area that it was, much to the delight of his family. But when he got back, he had been in captivity 6 years in Ireland. He got back home, a young man, and his family was overjoyed. He dedicated his life to prayer. He dedicated his life to studying for the priesthood under Germain, who was a famous missionary at that time. He had another dream, and in this dream it started by saying, the voice of the Irish people are calling you. He acted on this dream, begged Germain to intercede on his behalf to Pope Celestine, to grant him permission to go back to Ireland as a missionary. His parents did not like this, but the Pope did this. So now Patrick goes back to Ireland to begin his life, where he lived the rest of his life, bringing the Christian faith to the Irish. There had been other missionaries to Ireland prior to Patrick. None of them anywhere near as successful as he was. One of them was Declan. Where's Declan? Sorry, Declan. You didn't quite cut it. I think the reason that the others hadn't cut it and Patrick was successful is because in his 6 years living in Ireland, he appreciated the Irish people. He learned the language, and none of the others had done that. I think the word convert is too strong for what Patrick did. He did not change the people. He knew that there was an innate spirituality to the Druids who inhabited Ireland. They were not Christian. They were very, very sophisticated in their spirituality, and he played to that. I think that it was more that he offered Christianity to them, and he developed their own innate spirituality that was there. I think any of us who have been to Ireland know you cannot possibly live in that country, in that setting, and look upon the lovely lakes and get hit with the lashing rain, and to look upon the rocky shore and get hit again with the lashing rain, and to look out at the beautiful valleys and see the ships, the sheep and the cows grazing, and again get pounded with the lashing rain, to know that there's something bigger than you going on in this world. And the Irish knew that, and Patrick knew that, and he played to that. And he traveled the entire country preaching the gospel. He was very successful, but not initially and not always. A number of chieftains resisted him. There was one chieftain named Tiku who resisted Patrick, in fact raised his arm to him, and then he found his arm to be frozen like a statue. He could not move it. And eventually he only could move his arm when he pledged obedience to Patrick. When he did this, his arm was released. He was so impressed that he offered a large barn to Patrick. Patrick dedicated that as the first monastery in Ireland. Patrick spent 7 years alone in Connaught, traveling and preaching the word. At Tara, it was where he first used the shamrock, you know that story, to preach the Trinity. At Armagh, He wanted to build a cathedral. He wanted to build what would just be a church. And the chieftain in Armagh offered him a site. Patrick didn't like it. He offered him another site. Patrick didn't like that. Eventually, Patrick tore him down. They got a very nice site on the hilltop. Built the church. That cathedral at Armagh is standing to this day. Extremely successful in what he did. So much so that the institutional church back in Britain was becoming very, very jealous. Until then, missionary work was confined to the boundaries of the Roman Empire. Ireland was decidedly outside of the boundaries of the Roman Empire. No one understood why he would bother going to this barbaric place to preach the word. So there was an awful lot of jealousy developing. Patrick's response to this was, is it a disgrace to be Irish? That's what he said. I think we know the answer to that. It's no disgrace to be Irish. Patrick loved the Irish people, and they responded to that. But still, the jealousy and the negative feedback came from the church. There were two events that crystallized this. One was Caroticus. Caroticus was a Welsh chieftain, very prominent, although a nominal Christian, had just recently raided the Irish seacoast and enslaved a group of Christians Patrick had just baptized. He enslaved them, he raped them, he killed them, and Patrick was furious. Now, Caroticus was tied into the church, and Patrick wrote a letter to Caroticus. That letter to Caroticus was filled with very, very fiery language. Patrick knew that he was not writing to Caroticus, so that's who the letter was addressed to. He was writing to the church, and he was telling the church, I will defend my mission, I will defend my people against any and all. The second thing that happened was that he was brought up on trumped-up charges for not being either morally or educationally fit to conduct this mission that he was on. And in response to this jealous, negative feedback within the church, he wrote his confession. Patrick's confession, not at all like Augustine's of Hippo, which was a contemporary of Patrick. It was not a chronological autobiography of his life. It was more of a prayer. It was first and foremost a defense of his mission and a defense of bringing the Word of God to the Irish people. And beyond that, it was his discussion of his own prayer life. He begins by acknowledging what he's up against within the church. And he said, I am Patrick, yes, a sinner, and the humblest of peasants. And for this I am despised by the majority of men. He goes on in the confession, which is a lovely book. I don't have it all memorized. And I suggest you give yourself a treat this St. Patrick's Day and pick this up. But I'd like to read the ending. It's just a paragraph or so. I should have turned the page. This is how he ends his confession. But I beg and beseech all those who believe and fear God, whoever comes across this writing and takes the trouble to read it through, namely the writing of Patrick, a sinner, who though he was never taught, wrote it down in Ireland, that no man may ever say if in my ignorance I have accomplished any small thing, however trivial, or if I have shown the way according to God's good purpose, that this was my own ignorance at work, but rather know and believe it to be the undeniable truth that it was the gift of God. This is my confession before I come to die. So for generation after generation, that faith that Patrick had in the Irish people lived on after him. And for generation after generation after generation, the Irish kept that faith. And for century after century after century, the Irish people modeled themselves after Patrick. And in the 19th century, when we were starved off of our beautiful homeland, and 1 million of us died, and 2 million of us had to leave, half of them came to New York, and tens of thousands of them came to Brooklyn, and we're still here.